With the experiences that he gained last year, plus a new voice on the offensive side of the ball, there's no question that Spencer Rattler will be improved as a passer this fall.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of Locked On Gamecocks, and you can find my written work over on Gamecocks Digest on SI.com. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. We got a lot to dive into on this Monday edition of Locked On Gamecocks. We're going to talk about Spencer Rattler and just how much could he improve in 2023. Plus, Lenore Sellers and Dowell Loggains could both end up helping out the Gamecocks when it comes to recruiting in the transfer portal. I'll explain why later on, and at the end of the show, we'll discuss a big-time 2025 target that decommitted from another powerhouse school this weekend and why Gamecock fans need to keep an eye on him moving forward. All that on today's edition of Locked On Gamecocks. But let's start with Spencer Rattler, because due to the change at offensive coordinator and the experiences that he accumulated last year, both the good and the bad, I think that Spencer Rattler is going to play better and also cleaner in 2023. When I say better, I think that there's going to be a lot more explosive plays, a lot more plays that end in points for South Carolina. And when I say cleaner, I basically mean that I think that Spencer Rattler will do a better job of taking care of the football. Now, it's really easy to sit here and say that we think that Spencer Rattler is going to play better and play cleaner football in 2023. But how exactly do we try to quantify that? Well, I think the best way for us to do this is to use his regular season stats from this past fall and play a quick game of over-under. And that's exactly what we're going to do to start off today's show. So let's dive into passing yards. Spencer Rattler threw for 2,780 passing yards in 2022. So therefore, I set the over-under at that number. In this case, I think Spencer Rattler will throw for more than 2,780 passing yards in 2023. For context, to start off, Spencer Rattler averaged around 29.6 pass attempts per game this past regular season. And it is widely expected by most of Gamecock Nation and some of the people in the building that Spencer Rattler is going to be throwing the ball even more in 2023. It's also safe to assume that there's going to probably be some more shot plays called for this offense this fall. Because Spencer Rattler, he showed late last season that when you call these design shot plays, and he is given a real good chance to actually get a solid throw off, Spencer Rattler, he can give you points on any given shot play. We saw that plenty against Tennessee. We also saw it against Clemson, and we saw it against Notre Dame. So I will say, I know that the offensive line, they might hamper the possibility of this happening this season because of all the experience that they lost from the 2022 squad. But in my opinion, overall, a higher volume of passes, plus likely more deep passes down the field, will equal more than 2,780 passing yards for Spencer Rattler in 2023. So therefore, when it comes to passing yards, I'm taking the over in this category. Now, the next category is passing touchdowns. Spencer Rattler threw for only 16 touchdowns in 2022. So again, I set the over-under right at 16. And there's no question here. I am taking the over on this 16 passing touchdowns mark. My only question for this category, honestly, is does anyone think that Spencer Rattler will struggle to average more than 1.25 passing touchdowns per game in the regular season this year? I'd say a few of you probably are thinking he will struggle. Now, I could end this discussion here and move on, but let's just entertain this for another minute. Because in short yardage situations, again, we talked about how the running game for South Carolina could struggle a good amount this year because of question marks both at the offensive line position and also at the running back position. And I do think that this is going to carry over to even short yardage situations, whether it be third and short or maybe some goal to go situations. And I think there's going to be times where even when those opportunities arise, that Dal Loggins is going to sit there and he's going to have more faith in putting the football in number 7's hands and letting him decide whether or not they get a touchdown or they extend a drive out of a certain play call. And so when you think about it from that standpoint, especially in those goal-to-go situations, again, I think there's no doubt Spencer Rattler is going to throw for more than 16 passing touchdowns this season. So once again, I'm hitting the over on this one. And then the last category that I want to jump into is interceptions. Obviously, last season, Spencer Rattler, he struggled in this area. Spencer Rattler threw 12 interceptions. So again, that's where I set the over-under. This does not include any fumbles that he may have had, but for the sake of this conversation, we're going to keep it at interceptions. So the over-under is at 12. I'm going to go with the under here, but I have to admit, out of all the answers that I've given to this point, this is the one that I'm least confident in. But I will say, even though this is where I have my lowest confidence, my confidence is still healthy for one main reason. How Spencer Rattler discussed this specific topic at SEC Media Days in Nashville a week and a half ago. Because at multiple times in Nashville, Spencer Rattler, without the subject being brought up to him specifically, he brought up how he needed to do a better job of taking care of the football. He needed to do a better job of just trusting the play call itself. He admitted that at times last year, he probably trusted his arm talent a little bit too much. And again, that is something people say with great power comes great responsibility. In the case of an athlete, that can be parlayed into, you know how much talent that you've got, but just because you're uber talented does not mean that you could be reckless with your decision making. And at times, Spencer Rattler, he did that in 2022. And there's no question that as long as this coaching staff still leaves this offense open for Spencer Rattler, which I think that they're still going to do, Spencer Rattler will still probably throw some interceptions this year. He'll still probably throw a couple that'll make fans sit there and scratch their heads and wonder what he was seeing on that particular play. But I like the fact that Spencer Rattler, he emphasized multiple times in front of all the media, in front of all the cameras and microphones at SEC Media Days, that he understands and knows that he has got to be better in this facet of his game. And Shane Beamer, what did I love about what he said? The fact that, again, he wants him to have less turnovers, but he also does not want to basically handicap Spencer Rattler. He does not want to make him gun shy to make some aggressive decisions at times. Because obviously in the SEC, and especially considering the sort of composition of South Carolina's offense this year, South Carolina at times, they're going to have to be willing to take some chances. And they've got just the right quarterback, in my opinion, to do that. But overall, despite the fact that I think he'll throw more passes, obviously, which means there's going to be more opportunities for there to be turnovers, I think that Spencer Rattler will throw for less than 12 interceptions in 2023. So therefore, I've got the under in this spot. So 2 overs and 1 under across the board. I think that Spencer Rattler is going to have a better and cleaner season in 2023. And I think that his stat line is going to back that up. Now, we've talked a lot about Spencer Rattler. And obviously, there's been some talk about the guy that could be the backup quarterback behind him in Lenore Sellers, and what all he could do as the potential future quarterback for South Carolina's football program. But there's another way, besides his on-field play, where Lenore Sellers could help out South Carolina this calendar year, along with his offensive coordinator in Dowell Loggains. And we're going to dive into where exactly I'm going with that in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Now, One of the most important things in your life, obviously, is your vehicle, because your vehicle is what helps you get to work and the grocery store and the gym and other places. Your vehicle is basically a part of your everyday life. So you need to make sure that every part of your car fits just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories for your car, you need to head on over to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that the part will fit, or you'll get your money back. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, whether it's wiper blades, tires, or spark plugs, you'll be back in the game in no time. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day in just 30 minutes. And for all of you who love offense when it comes to the game of football, I think you're going to want to stay tuned in to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast throughout the rest of this week, because over the next couple of days, we're going to discuss things like what Dal Loggins' offense could look like for South Carolina in 2023, and also how Antoine Juice Wells could be the SEC's leading receiver this fall. We'll dive into those topics and plenty more as this week progresses right here on Locked On Gamecocks. But let's talk about Dowell Loggains and also the potential future at South Carolina's quarterback position in Lenore Sellers, because I think that both of these guys could be selling points for South Carolina's transfer portal recruiting efforts after the 2023 season. Now, for some quick context here, South Carolina landed 2024 athlete Zymarian Lang on Sunday, and he's going to play receiver to start his college career here at South Carolina. I did a separate show on Lang's commitment yesterday, so be sure to go and check that out if you haven't already done so. It's available both on audio podcast apps and on YouTube. But I bring up Lang's commitment for this conversation because unless someone pops up late, or maybe something drastic happens in Keelan Adams or Jonathan Taylor's recruitments, there are no more obvious wide receiver targets for the Gamecocks in this current recruiting cycle. And this would likely mean that South Carolina is going to have to hit the portal for some wide receivers after the 2023 season. Now, I've said before that you can't make it a habit of always relying on the transfer portal when stuff like this happens, but nonetheless, I do think that the Gamecocks are going to have to do that after this season is over. So relating this back to Lenore Sellers and offensive coordinator Dal Loggins, how do both of these guys fit into this conversation? Well, I follow up that question with this question. What is one thing that all good wide receivers who are either proven commodities or have a high ceiling have in common? They all want to play with really talented quarterbacks in an offense that is going to be wide open for them. Let's talk about Lenore Sellers first and how he fits into this equation. I've talked before about how Sellers could be a good change of pace quarterback that comes in for certain situations in South Carolina's offense this year. Now, him being a good selling point and him basically being able to do those things is going to require Shane Beamer and Dowell Loggains to both let him go out there and actually get some snaps this season. Essentially, don't be around the bush in terms of potentially upsetting guys that are in the quarterback room behind Spencer Rattler, or maybe at times upsetting Spencer Rattler. Now, I'm not saying you let Lenore Sellers go out there and play an entire drive or two in bigger games, but showcase his skill set in certain spots. I don't think that you have to upset the apple cart per se to be able to do that if you're Shane Beamer and Dowell Loggains. Now, let's say Lenore Sellers does get that opportunity this fall, and he goes out there and he changes the complexion of entire drives in certain games. Maybe he even changes entire football games this fall. because of how well he's doing, because of the problems that he is presenting to the opposing defense. What if that ends up winning South Carolina some football games? What could happen? Well, receivers that go into the portal after this season, if they do their research on South Carolina, they might take note of what Lenore Sellers is doing at the quarterback position. And thus, they will automatically be a lot more interested. The only thing that might hurt Lenore Sellers in this aspect is the fact that he'll still be a young quarterback. He's obviously going into just his first year in college football. But I think that anybody that watches Lenore Sellers for just a minute or two, whether it's his high school film or what he might do in 2023, I think everyone will sit there and the first thing they'll say is, that kid has got a lot of potential. That kid could be a star at the quarterback position. And if wide receivers are seeing that, then I think it will make South Carolina a lot more attractive to possible portal targets after this season, which again, they're going to have to dip into the portal at wide receiver unless things drastically change on their high school recruiting board. Now, let's switch gears and talk about Dal Loggins for a second. How could he help South Carolina in this aspect? Well, Dal Loggins, since his days in Tennessee, when he was the offensive coordinator for the Titans in like 2012 and 13, he has been commended for his willingness to not just communicate openly with his guys on the offensive side of the ball, especially his quarterbacks, but also allow his players to give feedback on plays that maybe don't work well, or maybe plays that the players think will work well, plays that will fit their skill sets, and plays that could help out the entire offense, maybe add another dimension to the offense. And for all the things that people say about how, well, Dowell Loggains didn't seem to be a great offensive coordinator in the NFL. The numbers don't pan out very well. There was this one article that rated him the worst offensive coordinator. I get all that. If you're going to say that, though, you have to acknowledge that out of the positives that he developed from his time in the NFL, this is certainly one of them. He created a reputation as being a player-friendly offensive coordinator. That is music to players' ears. Players especially, they're looking for an opportunity to play in an offense where it's not going to feel like they are hamstrung. Maybe they're not going to be in an offense that's going to sputter a lot. That is what hurt South Carolina's offense in recruiting both at the high school level and in the transfer portal the last couple of years. Imagine if things can change for the Gamecocks when it comes to that this season under the guise of Dowell Loggains. And then you throw in the fact that Dal Loggins runs an offense that runs through his quarterback. His quarterback is the first priority when it comes to his scheme, catering his scheme and play calling around his quarterback skill set. And of course, he involves everybody else as well. But the quarterback is his primary concern when it comes to that portion of his job. That kind of offense that's being run through a quarterback is also subsequently good for his targets at the wide receiver position. Because when you got a quarterback back there that is really talented, like Lenore Sellers, then that makes it more likely that you've got an offense that's also going to be helpful for those wide receiver targets. You're going to get your chances. You'll have a shot to make some highlight reel type plays. Dal Loggins could drop some plays that make you look really good. Lenore Sellers could throw you some passes that make you look really, really good. Wide receivers want to be in an offense that could offer that opportunity. And if South Carolina's offense can show that this year, plus Lenore Sellers getting a chance to display his skill set and what he could offer for South Carolina over the next couple years, then that could help them out greatly when it comes to dipping into the portal after this season and trying to find some wide receivers. Because again, they're going to have to do that unless some things change with Jonathan Paylor or Keenan Adams, or maybe someone else that we don't even know about yet pops up on their radar. So that is why Lenore Sellers and Dal Loggins this season could have pretty big implications, not just for what the future of the offense looks like, but also just how much they could recruit out of the portal after the regular season concludes. Let's now talk about some big-time recruiting news that came out this past Saturday. Recruiting news that is going to have some interesting implications here for South Carolina, as 2025 safety prospect and Gamecock target Shante Gilbert officially decommitted from the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, this is a big deal if you're a Gamecock fan, for a couple different reasons. The first thing to note here, Gilbert is extremely talented. Jontae is rated as the 35th best prospect nationally and the 4th best safety in the entire country for the 2025 recruiting class. And if you don't fully believe the rankings for whatever reason, then here's his offer sheet. It backs it up fully. He has offers from Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Southern Cal, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Florida State, Auburn, Arkansas, and plenty of others as well. I say it again, Shante Gilbert clearly pretty doggone talented in that defensive backfield. Another reason why this is a big deal and why South Carolina fans should pay attention to this moving forward, Shante Gilbert's interest in South Carolina has grown exponentially this year. He has visited South Carolina 3 times since the start of April. He visited at the very beginning of April, I believe on April Fool's Day or April 1st. He then came back for the Guardian Black Spring game on April the 15th. And he just visited Columbia this past Thursday. And when talking to Gamecocks Digest recruiting insider Fisher Brewer, he told our guy Fisher that this felt like home. That South Carolina really felt like home to him on his last visit. We should keep that in mind moving forward, especially considering what all happened on Saturday. Now, South Carolina, up to this point, I've made it sound like that he is basically somewhat a shoo-in to come to the Gamecocks. And while South Carolina is definitely going to be a big-time contender here, and maybe right now they are a slight favorite, they're by no means the only team involved here. There's a few other teams that Gamecock fans are going to need to watch out for. The first one I'm going to throw out is Georgia Tech. Now, some of you might be stopping what you're doing right now, and you might be cleaning out your ears and going, wait a second, did I just hear him correctly? Did he just say Georgia Tech might be the biggest competition here? Yes, I did. You did hear me correctly on that. Shante Gilbert has visited Georgia Tech 4 different times now, including this past Saturday, which was actually the visit that preceded his news of him decommitting. I'm not going to make it out like that means that Georgia Tech's got the lead here, but it's very clear that whatever new head coach Brent Key is doing over there right now with the Yellow Jackets, it is working. Because Georgia Tech's name is being brought up a lot more in some of these recruitments. Even recruitments over guys like Shante Gilbert. And this is an example of that right here. So, Gamecock fans, we got to watch out for Georgia Tech in this recruitment moving forward. Another team I'll throw out. This one's pretty much an obvious one. Well, honestly, both of the last 2 teams are obvious here. The first one's Georgia. Georgia hasn't seemed like a big contender to this point, but Gamecock fans, as we have learned the hard way over the past cycle and a half or so, Georgia is at a point where they can basically sort of piddle around and wait to really start pursuing some of these kids from their own backyard. Shante Gilbert is a Georgia native. And so if the Bulldogs feel like that they need to really go after him at any point, I'm pretty sure that they could. And who knows? Maybe they would automatically get him if they did. They've proven that they can do this already before. They've done it this cycle with a guy like Justin Greenham from the defensive line. A big loss for South Carolina because they had put in so much good work there just to watch it all evaporate in a matter of weeks because Georgia basically upped the ante in terms of their efforts going after Justin Green. So you can't count out the Bulldogs in any way, shape, or form here either. And then the last team is Ohio State. And the surprising thing is I rank Ohio State dead last out of this group, to be honest with y'all. Because I know that the Buckeyes obviously had Gilbert committed for quite a while. I believe since this past summer, before he decommitted this past weekend. But I just don't think Ohio State's going to be as big of a contender here in Shante Gilbert's recruitment moving forward. The last time that Ohio State supposedly got Shante Gilbert to visit them was back on April the 4th. That's at least according to Gilbert's on-through recruiting profile. Since that last visit to Ohio State, Gilbert's taken 9 visits to other schools. 2 of them to South Carolina, and I believe possibly 3 of them to Georgia Tech, and then a bunch of other sort of one-off visits to other schools in the Southeast. Nonetheless, especially if you go back and you see what all he said when he decommitted, he didn't say anything about Ohio State still remaining in his recruitment at this point. He didn't say anything about how they still have as good of a shot as anybody. Sometimes these kids will do that if they do end up decommitting. Shante Gilbert did not do that. So that kind of tells me, or at least signals to me, that it seems like the Buckeyes might honestly be out of it. I'm not going to completely count them out just yet, but it does seem like that Ohio State honestly might be 3rd or 4th in the pecking order right now when it comes to Shante Gilbert's recruitment. So right now, I think it's South Carolina and honestly Georgia Tech, kind of maybe a 1A, 1B, or maybe South Carolina's got a slight edge over the Yellow Jackets right now, but I'm telling y'all, cannot count out Georgia Tech here. They have honestly done a very good job, at least to this point, recruiting Shante Gilbert. So, who knows? From what we have seen this summer, we cannot be surprised anymore with what some of these schools might end up doing. So, Georgia Tech's one to watch. Georgia's clearly one to watch. And I'll still include Ohio State, but that one seems a little less likely at this point in time. With that all being said, that is going to do it for today's show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show. As always, what are your thoughts on what Spencer Rattler could do in 2023? Do you think Dowell Loggains and Lenore Sellers could help the Gamecocks when it comes to their portal recruiting efforts at the wide receiver position after the 2023 season? And lastly, what are your thoughts on Shante Gilbert decommitting from Ohio State? How confident are you that he'll end up a Gamecock at the end of his recruitment? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section on YouTube, or shoot me a direct message on Twitter at @aline_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. Otherwise, thank y'all once again for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Monday and a fantastic start to the work week. And I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.